David from New Jersey. With LeBron headed back to Cleveland, is it possible that if he wins a title on two different teams, which is something Jordan never did, will that give him a chance of overtaking his Anderson? Well, David, this is a common question if LeBron can overtake Jordan. It's a legitimate question, but we'll break that down in a second. Uh, let's address whether Jordan won on two different teams. I would dispute that. I think he did. In 91 to 93, that was a very different team to the 96 to 98 one. Sure, there was Pippen. Sure, there was Phil Jackson. Sure, it was the same franchise, the Chicago Bulls. But you take away those elements, the first three-peat, you had Horace Grant, you had John Paxson, you had B.J. Armstrong, you had Stacey King, you had Bill Cartwright, you had Will Perdue, you had Craig Hodges. Compare that to the next three-peat, you had Rodman, you had Kukoc, you had Steve Kerr, Ron Harper, Luke Longley, etc., etc. So those teams were made up very differently, and they were different teams. But let's have a look at where LeBron is now and compare that to where Jordan finished up. Because essentially you're asking if he has a chance to overtake Jordan. Overall stats, these are career numbers. Jordan, 30 points per game, 6.2 assists a game, 5.3 rebounds a game, 2.3 steals a game, 0.8 blocks per game. LeBron, 27.5 points per game, 7.2 rebounds, 6.9 assists, 1.7 steals, and 0.8 blocks. So Jordan was ahead in terms of steals and points. LeBron is ahead in terms of rebounds and assists. They're both the same for blocks. Jordan's averages did plateau a bit with age, especially with the Washington years. But and LeBron is still in his prime. So if he continues to say 35, which was when Jordan retired from the Bulls, in an attempt to catch Jordan from like in terms of championships and awards, or exceed them if that's what he's trying to do, then expect his stats to also drop a little as well. Nothing majorly significant, probably a point from his point per game, so probably like 26 and a half will be his career average. Probably around six and a half rebounds, and maybe 6 assists. So those are still incredible numbers, by the way. But don't expect them to be as big as they are now. It's just, I mean, Kobe's numbers have dropped. You know, Tim Duncan's numbers have dropped. You see this, Kareem's numbers drop. You see this with great players. But we mentioned the championships and awards. You can try to chase them. So let's see where they are now. LeBron has 2 rings and 5 finals appearances. Jordan is 6 from 6 finals MVP. LeBron has 2 finals MVPs in the 2 championships that he's won. 4 season MVPs for LeBron, 5 for Jordan. Both really should be higher. I think Jordan should be at 6 or 7. Definitely should have won it in '97, and you can make a very solid argument for him deserving to win it in '93. And LeBron should have won it in 2008 when he was averaging nearly a triple-double and carrying a Cavs team to the playoffs and nearly knocking off the eventual champions, the Celtics. I think that Celtics team, in my opinion, is probably the best single team we've seen in the last 10 years in the NBA. And LeBron nearly ended that in the second round. 10 All-NBA selections for Jordan, 8 for LeBron. 9 All-Defensive Team selections for MJ, 5 for LeBron. 10 scoring titles for Jordan, only 1 for LeBron. Both have 2 gold medals, but LeBron has also been on 2 losing tournaments. The 2004 Olympics and the 2006 World Championships. In the Olympics, in Athens, he really didn't get an opportunity to play. If he did play, they probably would have won. They struggled in the pool stage. They knocked off Spain, and they lost in the semi-final, but then they won the bronze. I think they would have won if they played Iverson, Duncan, and then also went with Wade, Melo, and LeBron, even though they were rookies. I think they would have won instead of wasting their time with Lamar Odom and Carlos Boozer and whoever else was on that team. I can't remember. It was a bad team, and it was as total credit to Iverson and Duncan for at least getting them to a bronze. Oh, Stephon Marbury was on that team too. You can't forget him. And he actually got them over the edge, over the line against Spain. Say what you will about him, but without him, they would have been out straight away. So yeah, so those are the awards. Now we're going to look at context because you can't just basketball isn't a science, despite what all the nerds out there will say. Jordan played in a tougher league, in a tougher era. There was more talent. You look at the talent was when he arrived. There's Magic, Bird, Isaiah. Magic and Bird, you're talking about two, like realistically and legitimately, two of the top three players maybe of all time. And they were at their peak when Jordan arrived. Isaiah was there. Dr. J was there. These are some. Kareem was there, but he was at the latter end of his career. He wasn't as dominant. But there's some big, great. You count on one hand greatness. If you're going to shortlist the great players of all time, they're that good, and that's who Jordan was up against. And then when Jordan ascended, you had Karl Malone, you had Barkley, you had Drexler, you had Stockton, you had Shaq, Reggie Miller, Ewing, Alonzo, Hakeem, David Robinson. I could go on and on with these great players. And you compare that to LeBron's competition, which is Kobe and Duncan, also Shaq, Durant, Garnett, Melo. These are some great players too, but I don't think they really match up with what Jordan went through and what Jordan held down. You look at some of these guys, right? Karl Malone, Stockton, Drexler, Barkley, Reggie Miller, Ewing, Alonzo. A lot of those guys were denied championships directly because of Jordan. If Jordan wasn't as good as what he was, Barkley and Malone would have had rings, and all of a sudden they jumped 10 places higher on the all-time list because they have a ring. What's keeping him back was Jordan. So you can't say that was a weak era there wasn't as much parity because the talent was there. The talent was there. It's just Jordan was holding them down. Talking about that, a lot of thoughts sort of running through my head right now is the East, when Jordan was ascending, was maybe the toughest that conference has ever seen. And, you think about it, you had Bird's Celtics, you had Isaiah's Pistons, Dr. J's, and then Barkley's 76ers, Ewing's Knicks. You had, the Cleveland Cavaliers with Mark Price and Brad Daugherty. You had the Milwaukee Bucks are a good team. That was maybe the toughest that conference has ever been, ever. Now, you compare that to what you see now, or the last few years with the East, and maybe it's been the weakest that it's ever been. Who's been a legitimate contender? If you're going to see the Indiana Pacers, and you should stop this right now and stop following basketball, because the Pacers are maybe one of the weakest teams, one of the biggest imposters we've ever seen. They were very, very lucky to get past the Atlanta Hawks, and the Hawks were maybe one of the weakest teams to qualify for the playoffs in the last 25 years. Who else has there been? A broken down Celtics, that took a miraculous and heroic game from LeBron himself to get them out of that 3-2 hole in Boston. Who else has there been? The Knicks, come on. If you're really going to use the Knicks, then this argument's over. I mean, yeah, Melo is a great player. I think he's a very underrated player. But if you're really going to put them in the same class as what Jordan was up against with Isaiah's Bad Boys or, Dr. J's Sixers, then it shows how ridiculous this conversation has become. I think sticking along the lines with context, Jordan exceeded expectations nearly every time he played. Not always. Like, there was times when he struggled, especially against the Pistons. But once he got their taste of winning, he never really was questioned again. He never allowed that question to reappear. Whereas with LeBron, even once they won, they won in 2012, and the very next finals, he was being questioned. It wasn't until that Game 7 performance that they kind of stopped again in terms of the questions. But against the Pacers as well, he was being questioned that year too. LeBron has had situations where, he was being favorited in big series, and they've lost, against the Magic with Dwight Howard. or unbackable favorites, and they lost. The very next year to the Celtics in the second round, unbackable favorites, and they lost. 2011 to the Mavericks, unbackable favorites, and they lost. And this past year to the Spurs, they're actually slight favorites before the series started, and they lost. So the past 4 losses that his team has been a part of, whether it's been in Cleveland or Miami, they have been favorited, and they lost. The only time Jordan and the Bulls were favorites and they lost was 95 against the Magic, and really you have to question that in hindsight. He's 20 games removed from playing baseball, and they run up against the number 1 seed Magic. Sure, they're young, but still they're the number 1 seed, and they're somehow the favorites. Regardless, they were the favorites and they lost. But apart from that, in his entire career, he's never been a favorite in a series and lost. He has been an underdog in the series, and the Bulls have been underdogs. 93 Suns, and also the 98 Jazz were favorites in the finals. Both those times those opposing teams had home court advantage in the finals too, and the Bulls were able to overcome those odds to win. But some of those question marks still exist with LeBron. Overpassing, not aggressive enough, not engaged enough, etc. And it's kind of disappointing because once Jordan won, we never got those questions again. Jordan never allowed those questions to reappear. I think getting back to the question, that's a pretty broad overview of the comparison, and I think it's safe to say that Jordan is still quite significantly ahead. If LeBron is to do this, and this is a massive if, it really is, he has to get at least 1 3-peat under his belt. Jordan did this twice. So, for me to just say he has to get at least 1 is kind of bending the rules for him. We're asking if LeBron can surpass Jordan. So the least he can do is tie him, right? He should, before we even talk about surpassing. But let's talk hypothetical. Let's say if he gets to 1 3-peat and wins when not favorite, as I said before, when Jordan did this in 93 and 98, so he surpasses him in MVPs, which is totally possible. He's only 1 away, and somehow surpass him in scoring as well as maintaining his rebounding and assist edge, and become a better defender. Then we could make a legitimate, not comparison, but you can make a legitimate argument that he actually is ahead of him. LeBron is on track to be a top 5 player of all time, which is a tremendous. You think about the hundreds of millions of players. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't have the stats in front of me. Hundreds of millions of players that have picked up a basketball in their life, and we're talking about top 5. I mean, I don't know what percentage that is, but it's minuscule. But he's not on track to being the greatest player of all time. Not at this stage. It isn't out of the question. It is possible, which is a total compliment to him. But he has to somehow improve from his prime, which is so. It's almost unrealistic to ask of him, but it's not out of the question. It's not like saying, well, can Isaiah Ryder do it? Can Kevin Garnett do it? Well, no. They're out of the question. But LeBron is not quite out of the question yet. But it comes down to, can he improve? And that's a hell of a lot to ask for somebody at that stage of their career. But it will take a lot more than just winning on 2 different teams to overtake Jordan. But even if he wins 1's not enough. I mean, you can't look at the body of work for both guys and say, well, and then hang your hat on the fact that he's won on 2 different franchises. That to me is not enough.